I had always carried myself with quiet pride. In my early 50s, I was finally at a point where my career wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. This business trip wasn't just another work obligation. It was proof that I had built something of my own, something I could be proud of. Still, as the train sped farther away from home, I felt that familiar tug of missing Robert, my husband of nearly 3 decades. I texted him goodnight with a smile, never imagining what was about to unfold. My hotel room was sleek and modern, the kind of place that smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh linens. I had just slipped off my heels, the relief spreading through my aching feet, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. I rolled my eyes, assuming it was spam or maybe another pointless promotion. With a soft laugh, I ignored it and reached for the complimentary bottle of water. But the buzzing didn't stop. It came again, then again, like an urgent knock on a locked door. At first, I brushed it off with mild annoyance, but when I finally picked up the phone, my breath caught. The screen filled with messages, photos, receipts, names, dates, each one sharper than the last. My stomach twisted as though the floor beneath me had shifted. Someone was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. And as my hand trembled around the phone, I realized this wasn't spam. This was a message meant to shatter my world. I sat there on the edge of the bed, the glow of the screen casting a pale light across the room. My heart pounded so loudly I could almost hear it echo against the walls. Each new ping brought another blow. A dinner receipt from a restaurant Robert and I had once celebrated our anniversary at. A blurry photo of him leaning too close to a woman I didn't recognize. A hotel confirmation under his name. My mouth went dry, my pulse racing as if I were running but trapped in place. I wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as some twisted mistake. But deep down, something in me knew better. The details were too specific, too painfully intimate to be fabricated. My fingers hovered over the screen, torn between deleting the messages and digging deeper. I tried to steady my breathing, but it only made the tremors in my hands worse. Every image burned into my memory, searing itself into a place I couldn't escape. I whispered his name into the empty room, as if speaking it out loud might summon him, might force this nightmare to collapse into something less real. But the silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My phone buzzed again, and this time the message wasn't just evidence. It was a sentence, short and sharp. "You deserve to know the truth." I stared at those words, my throat tightening. Whoever was behind this, they weren't going to stop. Sleep became impossible. I tossed the phone onto the nightstand, only to snatch it back seconds later, rereading every message as if the meaning might change. The photos stared back at me, Robert's smile so familiar yet now tainted, his hand resting casually on someone else's shoulder. My stomach churned with a sick mix of disbelief and fury. How long had this been going on? How much of my marriage had been a lie? The hotel room that once felt sleek and comforting now seemed cold, suffocating. The hum of the air conditioner sounded like a cruel reminder that I was alone in this discovery. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to calm the storm inside me, but the harder I tried, the more the anger seeped in. It wasn't just sadness. It was betrayal, raw and sharp, cutting into places I thought were safe. And yet, as the night dragged on, I didn't call him. I didn't demand answers. Something inside whispered to stay quiet, to hold my ground. If Robert thought I was in the dark, then maybe, just maybe, I'd have the advantage. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone like a weapon I hadn't yet learned to use, knowing that the real battle was only beginning. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning at all. I hadn't closed my eyes once. Instead, I sat hunched over the edge of the bed, my phone clutched tight, scrolling through the evidence again and again. Screenshots of messages, words of affection that were never meant for me, glared back at me like tiny daggers. Dinner dates, late-night calls, even hotel bookings, all neatly lined up like an exhibit in a courtroom. It was undeniable. My stomach twisted as though it were rejecting the truth, but my eyes couldn't look away. Each swipe of my thumb pulled me deeper into a reality I hadn't asked for. I remembered Robert's familiar excuses: working late, networking dinners, the sudden business trips. They all fit too perfectly now, puzzle pieces snapping into place in the cruelest way. Rage prickled at the back of my neck, but under it all, a cold clarity began to form. The last message blinked on the screen. "You deserve to know the truth." My throat tightened. Whoever was sending these wasn't gossiping or speculating. They had receipts, literally. I felt my hands tremble, but not with fear anymore. No, this was something else. Something sharper. I realized in that moment that silence might be my strongest weapon. If Robert thought I was still blind, then maybe I could turn this nightmare into my own kind of leverage. The hours blurred together as I sat frozen in that sterile hotel room. My coffee went cold on the desk, untouched, while I stared at the evidence over and over. Robert's smile in those pictures felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Familiar, yet meant for someone else. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall. But I couldn't. I needed it. This was proof, black and white, undeniable. Every word I read cut deeper. "Can't wait to see you again." Last night was perfect. Messages I used to believe were mine alone now belonged to someone else. My hand shook, but I forced myself to keep scrolling, each line sinking me further into despair. My mind raced back to our dinners, our quiet evenings. Were they all rehearsals for his lies? It felt like my marriage had been rewritten in real time. But under the heartbreak, something else grew stronger. A quiet, simmering rage. I wasn't the kind of woman to crumble. Not anymore. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to be played like a fool. As the city outside my window stirred awake, I sat still, gripping the phone like a secret weapon. Robert thought he had the upper hand. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracking. By the time night fell again, I felt hollowed out. The hotel lights buzzed faintly above me, their cold glare making the room feel even more unforgiving. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the phone heavy in my lap, scrolling until my eyes burned. Each photo, each receipt, each careless word between them felt like a nail sealing shut the coffin of my marriage. My chest ached, but tears never came. I was too angry for that. I thought about calling him, demanding answers, screaming down the line until he admitted everything. But what good would that do? He'd only twist the truth, spin another web of excuses, maybe even turn the blame on me. No. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. My silence, I realized, could be louder than any outburst. It could be my armor. So I let the phone rest on the nightstand, though I never truly let it out of reach. My fingers still hovered over it, itching to gather more. If he thought I was blind, then fine. I'd play along. I'd smile, nod, and pretend. Because deep down, something fierce was stirring in me. And I knew the moment I walked back home, the real game would begin. When I returned home, I wore my best smile like a costume. Robert greeted me at the door, arms open, his voice dripping with the same charm that once melted me. I let him pull me in, kissed his cheek, and asked about his week as if I didn't already know the truth. Every lie he told slid smoothly off his tongue, and I nodded along, careful not to betray even a flicker of what churned inside me. My silence was my shield. The nights that followed were a test of endurance. Over dinners, I laughed at his jokes. In bed, I listened to him breathe, wondering if he realized I was wide awake, staring into the dark. But when he left for work in the mornings, my expression changed. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, combing through every scrap of evidence the messages had given me. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his investigator. And that's when I remembered the prenup, the no infidelity clause we had agreed upon years ago, back when love was fresh and promises were easy to make. At the time, I never thought it would matter. Now, it was my golden key. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through legal documents and emails, realizing that the anonymous messages weren't just proof of betrayal, they were leverage. Each day I became colder, more controlled. I smiled when Robert kissed my forehead. I asked about his meetings. I even cooked his favorite meals. On the surface, I was the picture of devotion. But beneath it all, I was collecting, filing, and preparing. Every piece of evidence, every careless mistake he made outside our home became another brick in the wall I was building against him. I reached out to a lawyer, someone I trusted to handle things discreetly. Sliding the prenup across their polished desk felt like sliding a loaded weapon into their hands. "There's a no infidelity clause," I whispered, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. My lawyer leaned back, eyebrows raised as they scanned the paperwork. With every nod, with every confirmation, the power shifted further into my hands. At night, I lay beside Robert and studied him as if he were a stranger. His laugh, his touch, even the way he scrolled on his phone, it all looked different now, tainted. He thought he was safe, that his secret life was hidden in shadows. But I saw it clearly, illuminated by the cold glow of screenshots and receipts. And the best part? He had no idea his days of deception were numbered. The more I uncovered, the steadier I became. Every new piece of proof wasn't a blow anymore. It was ammunition. I organized it all in a neat folder on my laptop, each document labeled, each image saved twice. It was almost clinical, the way I handled it. The pain was still there, yes, but I had learned to tuck it away. What replaced it was sharper. Focus, resolve, and a thirst for justice. Sometimes I caught myself watching Robert with a strange detachment. His words were smooth, his lies rehearsed, and yet I nodded along as though I still believed him. Inside, though, I was already steps ahead. The prenup wasn't just a clause anymore. It was a trap door under his feet. I only had to wait for the right moment to pull the lever. And waiting, as it turned out, became my greatest strength. Each morning I stood taller, my smile calmer, my silence more dangerous. Robert thought my composure meant ignorance, that I was blissfully blind. He had no idea that every breath he took under this roof was borrowed time. And deep down, I started to wonder, not just how I would confront him, but how far I was willing to go when the truth finally exploded in his face. It was a Tuesday evening when I decided the waiting was over. Robert walked in, humming softly, loosening his tie like the world was his to own. I watched him from the dining table, my hands folded neatly in front of me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. He smirked, mistaking my tone for affection or some trivial announcement. That smirk was the last straw. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick envelope I'd prepared. Photos, receipts, hotel confirmations, all printed, all undeniable. I slid them across the table, my eyes locked on his face. "Recognize yourself?" I asked, my words slicing sharper than any scream ever could. His hand froze mid-air, the color draining from his cheeks as he flipped through the pages. For the first time in years, Robert was silent. His lips parted, fumbling for excuses that never fully formed. I leaned back, crossing my arms, letting him drown in his own shame. "Don't bother lying," I said softly. The air between us was electric, heavy with the weight of everything he thought he'd hidden. And before he could gather himself, I signaled, and my lawyer stepped forward from the shadows of the living room. Robert's eyes darted from me to the lawyer, then back to the damning papers on the table. He stammered, his voice cracking, searching for some threadbare excuse. "This isn't what it looks like," he muttered, his hands shaking as he pushed the photos away. But the evidence stared back at him, merciless and permanent. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was louder than anything I could ever say. My lawyer slid the prenup across the polished wood, the faint scrape of paper sounding like a gavel in a courtroom. Robert's face went slack as he recognized the clause he had once signed so casually, back when promises flowed easily from his lips. "Your betrayal voids everything," the lawyer said firmly, tapping the document with a single finger. I watched as Robert's world shrank in that instant, his confidence collapsing like glass under a hammer. I leaned forward, my hands steady, my tone sharper than steel. "You thought I didn't know," I said. "You thought you could have your lies and still have me waiting at home, but I was never blind, Robert. I was patient." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. He knew finally that the game was over, and I was the one who had won. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Robert's fingers hovered over the documents as if touching them might make them disappear. But there was no escape now. Every receipt, every photo, every careless text was a nail in the coffin of his excuses. I had spent months preparing for this moment, and now I savored his downfall, steady and deliberate. For once, I was the one in control. He tried again, his voice cracking like a child caught in a lie. "We can fix this. You and me. We've been through worse." The desperation in his tone almost made me laugh. I shook my head, slow and certain, watching him realize just how powerless he really was. "No, Robert," I said, my words cold enough to freeze him in place. "You broke something that doesn't mend, and you signed away your last chance years ago." My lawyer packed the documents neatly, leaving Robert pale and speechless at the table. I rose to my feet, smoothing my blouse with calm precision, and walked past him without another glance. Behind me, I could hear his shallow breaths, the sound of a man watching his empire crumble. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. The real punishment was only beginning, and it was going to strip him of everything he thought he owned. Within weeks, the house no longer echoed with Robert's footsteps. His clothes, his laughter, his presence. It all vanished like smoke after a fire. The neighbors whispered, friends called, and the story spread faster than I ever could have planned. Everyone knew why he was gone. The photos, the receipts, the undeniable proof, they made sure of that. His reputation shattered, piece by piece, until nothing was left but pity. The mistress, bold enough to steal my place, disappeared the moment the money dried up. Without the promises of luxury and status, she had no use for him. Robert was left alone, stripped of both dignity and fortune, a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. And I? I stayed in the house we built, but this time it belonged only to me. Every corner felt different, like the air itself had been cleared. I poured my energy into my career, into the parts of my life that had never betrayed me. Meetings, conferences, late nights at the office. I embraced them with a fierceness I didn't know I had. Colleagues praised my focus, unaware that behind it all was a woman reborn. The betrayal hadn't broken me, it had set me free. And with each passing day, I grew stronger, sharper, more certain that I'd never let anyone diminish me again. There were moments when I caught myself wondering about the anonymous sender. Who had gone out of their way to expose Robert's lies? A friend? A stranger? Someone who had been close enough to see the cracks? I never found out, but sometimes I whispered a silent thank you into the night. They had given me the gift of truth, even if it came wrapped in heartbreak. And that truth had set the course of my freedom. Robert tried calling in the early days, his voice heavy with regret and desperation. I let the phone ring, watching his name flicker across the screen before silencing it. Once I almost answered, tempted to hear what excuse he might conjure. But then I remembered the folder of evidence, the nights of sleepless rage, the taste of betrayal. He didn't deserve my words anymore. Silence was the sharpest reply I could give him. The more distance I put between us, the lighter I felt. I redecorated the living room, painted the walls brighter, filled the house with music instead of his empty promises. My friends noticed the change in me, a glow they hadn't seen in years. "You look free," one of them said, and I smiled because that's exactly what I was. Free of his lies, free of his shadow, free to write a new story that belonged only to me. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit by the window with a glass of wine and think about everything that had unraveled. The pain was real, the betrayal unforgettable, but it no longer controlled me. I had survived it, reshaped it, and turned it into something powerful. Robert was nothing more than a chapter I had already closed, his absence no longer an ache but a relief. My heart, though scarred, beat stronger than before. I never once regretted the choice to stay silent until the time was right. That silence became my armor, my strategy, my revenge. He lost everything not in a burst of anger, but in the quiet, calculated unveiling of his own lies. And that, I realized, was the sweetest justice of all. No shouting, no begging, just the cold truth, laid bare for everyone to see. Life moved forward, and so did I. I built new dreams, traveled to places I'd always postponed, and poured myself into the parts of life that brought me joy. The messages I wasn't supposed to see had nearly broken me, but instead, they gave me back to myself. I didn't need Robert, or his lies, or even the closure of knowing who exposed him. What I needed was exactly what I had now, my freedom, my strength, and a future that belonged entirely to me.